I never thought a single confession could destroy everything. Yet, as I stood in the dim hallway of our home, heart pounding, I realized that some secrets are never meant to stay hidden. My stepbrother Adrian had told my stepdad, and now there was no turning back. But before the betrayal, before the unraveling, there was only the fire that started it all. When my mother married Thomas, I expected change. He was strong-willed, disciplined, a man of principle. He treated me well enough, though our bond was never effortless. His son, Adrian, was a different story. We weren't raised together. He had spent most of his life with his mother, and when circumstances forced him to move in with us, the house felt tighter, air heavier. He was striking, dark eyes that held a smirk even when his lips didn't, a lean frame that carried both confidence and recklessness. We were polite at first, two strangers pretending at brotherhood. But beneath that civility lay something else, something neither of us wanted to name. It started small, a look held for too long, the brush of hands in passing, the way his voice lowered when he spoke only to me. I ignored it, told myself I imagined it. Then one night everything shifted. Thomas was away on business. My mother had fallen asleep early. I was in the kitchen when Adrian walked in, shirtless, his skin glowing under the weak light. He leaned against the counter, too close, eyes dark with something unspoken. "You always this quiet?" he asked. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Guess so." A smirk curled his lips. "I think you just like watching." I should have walked away. I should have laughed it off. But I didn't. Adrian stepped closer, and for a moment, the world outside that kitchen ceased to exist. It was just us, two people bound by names but not by blood, drawn together by something neither of us could justify. The first touch was hesitant, the second, deliberate. By the time his lips brushed against mine, hesitation had been swallowed whole by hunger. It was wrong. I knew that. But the thrill of secrecy, the danger of it, only made it more intoxicating. Hashtag the guilt that came too late. We weren't careful. Maybe we thought we were, but stolen glances don't go unnoticed forever. And secrecy, no matter how desperately guarded, always has a way of slipping through the cracks. Adrian was reckless, whispering things in the dark, teasing even when others were around. I should have stopped it, should have been the responsible one. Instead, I let it happen. One evening, as we sat across from Thomas at the dinner table, Adrian smirked at me over his glass, a private joke hanging between us. Thomas noticed. His gaze flicked between us, suspicion shadowing his face, but he said nothing. That should have been the warning. That should have been enough. Then, Adrian did something I never expected. A few nights later, I heard him talking, his voice low but urgent. I crept down the hall, heart hammering, and stopped just before the study. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, Adrian stood in front of Thomas, his expression unreadable. The words that followed shattered the ground beneath me. "I need to tell you something about me and him." The air left my lungs. My vision tunneled. I wanted to rush in, to stop him, to undo everything we had done. But it was too late. Thomas would know. And once a secret is spoken aloud, it can never be unsaid. I had always believed that silence could protect me, that unspoken things held no weight, no consequence. But as I stood outside Thomas's study, listening to Adrian's voice cut through the fragile walls of my secret, I understood the truth. Words, once spoken, could never be buried. My feet felt rooted to the floor, heart hammering so violently I thought it might give me away. Through the narrow gap in the door, I saw my stepfather's face stiffen, his jaw locking in that precise way it did when he was trying to control his anger. "Adrian," Thomas said, his voice measured, but beneath it, a storm brewed. "What exactly are you telling me?" Adrian didn't hesitate. His lips curled into something unreadable. Was it defiance? Regret? I couldn't tell. "I'm telling you the truth. About me. About him." My breath hitched. The silence that followed felt like an abyss, stretching between my past and whatever future awaited on the other side of this moment. Then Thomas exhaled, slow and deliberate, as if forcing himself to remain composed. "And what truth is that?" Adrian's fingers twitched at his sides. that we're not just stepbrothers. A cold wave crashed over me. My fingers dug into the wooden frame of the door as Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression darkening. "Say it plainly," Thomas demanded. His voice was quiet, but it carried the force of something restrained, something dangerous. Adrian didn't flinch. We'd been together. The air in the room thickened, suffocating. I wanted to burst in, to take it back, to claim it was all a lie. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Adrian had already set everything in motion. Thomas's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "You mean to tell me that while you've both been living under my roof, He stopped himself, inhaling sharply, his hands pressing flat against the desk as if grounding himself. "How long?" Adrian's voice didn't waver. "Months." I braced for an explosion, for rage to shake the house. But Thomas didn't yell. He didn't move. Instead, he let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "I should have known," he muttered. His eyes lifted, and when they met Adrian's, they burned with something sharper than anger. "Was it a game to you? To both of you?" I had heard enough. The weight of my own cowardice crushed me as I finally stepped into the room. The moment Thomas saw me, his expression twisted into something unreadable. "So," he said, his voice eerily calm, "you don't even have the decency to deny it?" I swallowed hard. "What exactly do you want me to say, Noah?" He leaned forward, his piercing gaze searching mine, looking for an excuse, one I didn't have. "That this is normal? That it's nothing?" "It wasn't nothing," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes darkened. "And that's supposed to make it better?" Adrian crossed his arms, defiance creeping back into his stance. "Why does it have to be wrong?" "Because it is wrong." Thomas's voice finally cracked, his restraint slipping. "You lied to me. Both of you. You sat at my table, acted like family while sneaking around behind my back." He turned to me, betrayal cutting through his glare like a blade. "Did your mother know?" I shook my head. "No. She has nothing to do with this." A humorless chuckle escaped him. "Well, at least there's that." Adrian sighed. "Look, we didn't plan for this to happen, but it did, and we're not asking for your approval." Thomas's expression hardened. "You don't need my approval, Adrian. You need to understand what you've done." He turned back to me, eyes colder now, calculating. "And you, Noah, do you even realize what you've risked? Not just your own future, but this entire family?" My throat tightened. I didn't have an answer. I wasn't sure if I even deserved to defend myself. Thomas shook his head, exhaling sharply. "I need time," he muttered, rubbing his temple as if trying to rid himself of a headache. Adrian's posture stiffened. "Time for what?" "To decide what happens next." Something in his voice sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. Silence had settled over the house like a heavy fog. Days had passed since the confrontation, yet its echoes still clung to the walls, filling every space where words had once been. Thomas barely spoke to me. When he did, it was with clipped sentences and averted eyes, as if acknowledging me was an effort. My mother, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface, remained untouched by the truth for now. Adrian, on the other hand, was unchanged. If he felt remorse, he never showed it. Instead, he carried himself with the same easy arrogance, as if he had done nothing more than set fire to something just to watch it burn. But I was the one left standing in the ashes. One evening, I found myself outside Thomas's study, a place I had once been afraid to enter. Now, it was just another room filled with words left unspoken. I knocked softly. No answer. Taking a breath, I pushed the door open. Thomas sat at his desk, fingers pressed against his temples. He didn't look up, but I knew he heard me. "I know you don't want to talk to me," I started. "But I need to say something." He let out a slow breath, then finally lifted his gaze. The exhaustion in his eyes made my chest ache. I hesitated. "I didn't want to hurt you." Thomas scoffed. "That's the thing about betrayal, Noah. It doesn't really care about intentions." I swallowed hard. I never saw this as a betrayal. His stare hardened. "Then that makes it worse." A painful silence stretched between us. He leaned back in his chair, eyes studying me like I was a puzzle missing pieces. "Do you love him?" The question sent a jolt through me. I wasn't sure how to answer. Did I love Adrian? Or had I just loved the recklessness, the thrill of breaking rules? I don't know, I admitted. Thomas exhaled, shaking his head. Then why risk everything for it? I had no answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Later that night, I found Adrian outside, leaning against the porch railing, cigarette glowing between his fingers. He glanced at me, smirking as if nothing had changed. "You and Thomas have a nice little heart-to-heart," he asked. I frowned. "Why did you do it?" He raised a brow. "Do what?" "Tell him." My voice was sharper now, filled with something dangerously close to anger. Adrian chuckled, taking a slow drag of a cigarette. "You really think we could have kept it a secret forever?" I stepped closer. "You didn't have to be the one to tell him." His smirk faded, replaced by something colder. "Maybe I wanted to see what would happen." The words hit me harder than I expected. "You wanted to watch everything fall apart." Adrian shrugged. "Maybe." Then, tilting his head, he added, "Or maybe I just wanted to know if you'd still want me after." I stared at him, something inside me unraveling. I had convinced myself that what we had was more than just a reckless affair. But standing there, under the dim porch light, I realized something terrifying. Adrian didn't love me. He never had. He loved the game, the chaos, the destruction, and I had been nothing more than a willing player. The next morning I packed my bags. I wasn't sure where I was going, maybe to stay with a friend, maybe just to drive until the weight on my chest lessened. But I knew I couldn't stay here, trapped between a father's disappointment and a lover's indifference. As I reached the door, Thomas stood in the hallway, arms crossed. He didn't stop me. He didn't ask me to stay. He only nodded, as if he had known this moment was inevitable. "Be careful, Noah," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I hesitated, hoping for something else, a sign that things could be repaired, that not everything was broken. But Thomas had nothing left to give. Neither did I. With one last glance at the house that had held both my greatest desire and my deepest regret, I stepped outside. And I didn't look back.